Welcome into another off-season weekday edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. We talked a lot about the Super Bowl. We talked a lot about the AFC North, the mad scientist, a.k.a. the King of the North, Lou Anarumo, as I like to call him. Defensive King of the North, I should say. Now we get back to our positional reviews where we picked up last week. We talked about Joe Burrow. We talked about Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine. Now we're going to talk about Ja'Marr Chase, T. Higgins, and the wide receivers. Welcome into another edition of this podcast. Muhammad Ahmad here with you along with Andrew Gillis for today. And just jumping right into it, Andrew, before I kind of talk about what we saw from Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins and, of course, Tyler Boyd, something interesting I just saw today. I saw that ESPN Analytics actually has their own metrics where they rank wide receivers based on their routes, based on how wide open they are, based on their catches, yards after catch, and they partnered up with 538, who's one of the biggest analytics kind of websites out there, even for like non-sports related stuff. And interestingly, I'm looking at the overall ranks they have, and they did not have Ja'Marr Chase or Tyler Boyd in the top 10. They had T. Higgins. He was 7th overall amongst all wide receivers. Chase was 15th. Boyd was tied for him at 15th. And the top 5 overall receivers, just based on those combined metrics, from 1 to 5, was A.J. Brown of the Eagles, Justin Jefferson of the Vikings, Tyler Lockett of the Seahawks, Stephon Diggs of the Bills, and Deontay Johnson of the Steelers. Now, I do want to preface this. It doesn't necessarily measure who the best receivers are. It measures who the best receivers are based on those specific metrics of being open, being able to catch the ball, and yards after catch. And I will say this, if you actually look at the category for yards after catch, Ja'Marr Chase was in second. He had the second best yard after catch ranking after Deebo Samuel from the 49ers. T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd with both respectively top 9 in those categories at 7th and 9th. So I think that was actually really fair. But again, even though I said this doesn't rank the best wide receivers, I think the better question to ask instead of, did ESPN get it wrong is this a fair way to simply just measure how Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins did? Or is there actually a lot of truth to this that maybe they aren't quite as good as, A.J. Brown or Justin Jefferson or those guys? I mean, what do you kind of make of metrics like that when you see that, Andrew?
I think you kind of have to take them, for what they are. I mean, this considers, getting open, making the catch, and yards after catch. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into receiver play. I think a lot of Bengals fans are going to look at this list and say, how come Ja'Marr Chase isn't a top 5 receiver? Or, how come, Tyler Boyd's not in the top? Like, Tyler Boyd not being in the top 10 is not a surprise, but
right.
I wish Tyler Boyd was higher. They could kind of pick some nits with it. But then, truthfully, you look at the list, like a lot of names are at the top are pretty good. A.J. Brown, really good. Justin Jefferson, in my opinion, best receiver in football. You go down the list. There were a few surprises. Tyler Lockett being 3rd, Kittle being 6th, Ayuk being tied for 7th. Like, you can kind of, point out some names that surprise you. But, if you scroll further down the list, Devontae Adams was 24th. DeAndre Hopkins was 26th.
Yeah.
DK Metcalf was 32nd. Cooper Kupp was 36th. So I think that, when you look at some of these lists, I know some of those guys were injured, so that might have hurt them a little bit. I don't know exactly what the criteria was. If it was a relative scale where they were just taking, things that, you could, in 10 games, in 12 games, in 17 games, I don't know. But yeah, you look at kind of where they are. Ja'Marr Chase, I think the positive spin on this is the Bengals, according to this, had 3 top 15 receivers, which is pretty remarkable. Obviously this is, I think some fans are going to look at this and they're going to, they raise a few eyebrows. Tyler Lockett's not better than,
Deontay Johnson?
Hill.
Better than Ja'Marr Chase?
Deontay Johnson's not better than CeeDee Lamb, and George Pickens, Devontae Smith isn't better than Ja'Marr Chase. Like, I think you can kind of, go up and down and kind of pick some nits there. But yeah, it's a unique way to do it. You can sort it by getting open, by yards after the catch and things like that. Contested catch, and there were some interesting ones, but Like they Deebo Samuel, I just sort of had a 45. I just think it's one of those things in the offseason where, hey, here's a piece of math to look at, basically. And after that, I think it's kind of open to interpretation, and you shouldn't take a ton of stock in it.
And like you mentioned, Cooper Kupp, you said he was like, what, 32, 33? You said he was 33 this year?
36, I think it was.
36. I mean, he was 36, but if you look at last year, he was number
tied
one.
For 36 with Jalen Waddle, and for the record, they had 4 guys tied at 32nd: Dallas Goedert, Amon-Ra St. Brown, DK Metcalf, and Jacoby Myers. And then the guys at 36 were Jalen Waddle, Cooper Kupp, and Michael Pittman. Cooper Kupp and Michael Pittman are not on that same level. With all due respect to Michael Pittman.
And obviously, Cooper Kupp was a Triple Crown wide receiver, which is part of a big reason why, the Rams won the Super Bowl over the Bengals last year. But, I mean, yeah, he had the highest overall rating at 85. And then you mentioned Devontae Adams being down there. He was right behind Kupp. And guess who was right behind Devontae Adams? Mark Andrews and Kendrick Bourne. And Justin Jefferson was number 5, and Jamar Chase was number 6. And guess what? A.J. Brown, who was number 1, he was up there. He was number 7, but it just shows you, like, the metrics are just so unique. And I was wondering, like, how do you factor in, like, double contested catches, like going against cover 3 and, like 2 high safeties and, things like that? Because I was like, again, I'm not a mathematician. I was reading Brian Burke, who's like one of the big guys at ESPN with analytics. I was reading to kind of understand, like, the math and all the gizmos that went behind that, because there's a reason why I majored in journalism and not mathematics, although, of course, as journalists, we use math. It's just interesting how they blend the components together. Like you talk about, like just the catch score, the open score. Like, I think a lot of it, too, while it focuses on the wide receiver, you could say, well, what about the quarterback? Because, like, Deontay Johnson, maybe this isn't his defense. I mean, he was in that top 5, like we mentioned. But people might be shocked, like, Deontay Johnson? Nobody threw to him. Like, because, I mean, no offense, he had Kenny Pickett, who's a rookie, and Mitch Trubisky, which I'm not going to get into. But that, I think, in a way, kind of separated him from who was throwing him the ball. It's not about, okay, the Steelers' offense wasn't good, so Deontay Johnson maybe didn't have the numbers T. Higgins had. But if we're looking at what he did on his own, I think these metrics actually do a pretty good job. I mean, it also kind of goes hand in hand with NFL Next Gen stats, which we've talked about this on this podcast. We even kind of use that as example to talk about how, like, Joe Burrow made crazy throws that, the odds, percentage-wise, would not have expected him to make. But then those same, algorithms said, wow, he actually, completed this pass with a 2% higher possibility of him not supposed to make it. The kind of the expected versus actual completion percentage. Like, that's kind of what I think these metrics talk about with the wide receiver. So it is very interesting. I'm actually trying to become more of a numbers guru. Fun fact, math was actually my least favorite subject in high school, even though I tested out of calculus going into college. Thank God, because I heard Calc 1 was rough. Did you take math in college, by the way? What kind of math did you take? I never asked you this.
Whatever it was, I didn't do great in it. I think I had to take there was a psychology level math class or something like that you had to take. It was like Psych 1110, I think it was called, or something like that. I don't really remember. As soon as I could be done with math and science and everything, I was. I was not a math and science person.
I will say, for me, I didn't have to take calculus as a journalism major, but I only needed it because I was a business minor. But I thankfully got that out of the way in high school because I was not trying to be in a lecture hall with like 100 kids for that. But I digress. It's very interesting here. I think, people can definitely read more about it. And I think for those who might be wondering, like, oh, why did, Jamar and T not be higher? I think if they read more into it, they'll say, okay, it's not that they weren't top 5. It's just there were certain categories where they did well and could have done better. But jumping into kind of our own assessment of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, we've talked so much about this on this podcast that, they made a case in 2021 for being the best receiving trio, outside of Los Angeles, with Odell Beckham and, Cooper Kupp and that unit over there. And then, I think last year they made an even stronger case, if not just a strong case, because, even when Jamar went down, like T. Higgins proved he was more than capable of looking like a number 1 wide receiver. And that's why you have teams like the Bears and Justin Fields that want to trade for him to make them that number 1 guy. And so, he had, I think, the best year of his career. Not that the other 2 years weren't good. I just think this was his best ball when he had to step up even more. I think even if you take away Jamar's 4 games with injury, I think he played one of the best years of his career. It's kind of a shaky start because of, the cover 2 looks they got that they weren't used to his rookie year when he just had those home run balls from Joe Burrow. I think a lot of defenses they faced were a lot more younger, more stout, like we saw in Kansas City. So teams literally drafted, not entirely, but partially to prepare for guys like him. But I still think overall, he went against the odds that might have been against him in those situations, and he matched against them. For me, we talked about the whole Higgins extension. We talked about how Jamar is going to be due for one in 2024. I mean, that's almost as guaranteed as Joe Burrow getting an extension in this offseason like we've talked about. But, I want to zoom in on Higgins real quick before I get to Chase. I mentioned those 4 games where he played without Jamar. And he told, I think it was ESPN's Dan Orlovsky during Super Bowl week that, he believes he is capable of being a number 1 wide receiver, not just because he thinks he's capable of it, but he said specifically, I showed it, in his words, I showed it when, Jamar was out with a hip injury for 4 games. Other than maybe those 4 games, or I guess specifically those 4 games, like how much of a sample size is that for other teams to say, oh yeah, T. Higgins, number 1 wide receiver, book it? Like if the Bengals were to hypothetically not give him an extension and then he walks next year and he gets a lot of money, how much of that can you contribute to just those 4 games where there's no Jamar Chase? You only have Tyler Boyd and Trent Irwin behind you. How important is that sample size?
I mean, I think it matters. He had a really good game against Pittsburgh. He had another big game against Tennessee. That mattered. Doing that and kind of the stage that he did it on. But, I'm not sure that it – I think it was kind of what he did without Jamar that makes people kind of look, oh, well, this is it. But I don't know if that's the whole story. I mean, you saw what he did against the Chiefs in the AFC title game. I mean, he had that great catch in the end zone. He finished with 83 yards, he had 11 targets, 6 catches for 83 yards and a touchdown. Those targets did not come spread out. Like he was not getting the ball early. Like I think the first target of the game was that Joe Burrow interception in the second quarter. So they did not try to get him the ball early. And then once they kind of realized like, okay, well, they're going to double Jamar the whole game. We're going to go to T the rest of the day and we're going to make him stop it. I think that you can look to that. You can look and say, okay, he can be the guy that will get you a number 1 type performance like that. But I mean, there's kind of those statistical numbers and kind of showing that he can do it. But then there's also what the tape says and kind of him going up and mossing that dude. I forget who the DB was, but going up and making that great catch. Like that's not something that, number 2 receivers do. I've said it before. He's a number 2 receiver on the Bengals just because they have Jamar Chase, but he's on a lot of offenses in the league. He's a number 1 wideout. There's not too many teams where he's a number 2, and he just so happens to be one here.
I think that's just what's so remarkable is just think about it. The Bengals really hit the jackpot. Like there's a reason why you're talking about Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins being the big 3. Like, the big 3 is exclusively reserved for some of, professional sports' most elite trios. But you're talking about one of the most elite trios in, I think, pro sports from a football standpoint, especially if you want to just focus on that. And that's why I have said before, and I'll reiterate, he is absolutely due for an extension. I understand the priorities of Joe Burrow as it should be, and you got a lot of other big decisions to make. But, I mean, he's what? T. Higgins is only 24. He just turned 24. I mean, he's not even in his prime. Jamar's not even a hair within his prime. I mean, you have at least 5 really, really good years, from each guy. I mean, you have 10 combined years of experience coming up between those two, probably more for how well I think just they're built. I mean, you look at T. Higgins. I mean, how many 6'4" receivers can run as fast as him and Moss guys like Jalen Watson and the one player that you mentioned? Was it against the Tennessee game that you said he made that Moss catch?
No, the AFC title game.
Oh, AFC title game, yeah, that was Jalen Watson. Yeah, I mean, he
mossed
him. I think that was the best catch of his career. I mean, that That was it. And I mean, it's even.
I don't know. He made that catch against the Jets. That was the one
Which
that
one?
technically wasn't a catch. I think it should have been a catch. The catch that he made in the back of the end zone, that was pretty.
Oh,
pretty special.
yeah. Well, that's before I covered the team. I was actually watching that game. Yeah, that's debatable. I think, yeah, you make a good point, actually. I can't argue that. But I'm just going to be cheap and say, well, this one was a touchdown, and it was an AFC championship. But, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I bet you there's probably 2 or 3 other catches that I didn't mention that you didn't mention that could show you that, hey, T is in a league of his own. But I think another thing, like, this might sound cliche, but you think about it, like, he was banged up a lot this year. I mean, concussion protocol after the season opener against Pittsburgh. I think he also went into the protocol against that Jets game because he got hit on the sideline. I forget by who, but one of the Jets defenders. He didn't play at all in the Ravens game in prime time because his ankle was nagging him. He was active, he was suited up, but after like 1 or 2 plays, he just came out of the game. Those kind of caught up to him a little bit later in the year, in December. I mean, he still played, but like you could tell he was limited at times because of that same ankle. But he still fought through it. He still had, the same amount of receiving yards he had in, 2021. I mean, 74 catches, 7 touchdowns. He's averaging 14 yards a catch. That's hard to do. That's hard to do when, you've missed time, like against Baltimore, when you've been limited in certain situations, when you've been in the protocol. Like, I guarantee you could have easily had at least 80, 90 catches, well over 1,100 yards if he didn't miss those games I mentioned. And that's, so scary because, like, you look at Jamar, I mean, he had even more than that. He had more catches, more yards, more touchdowns, and he missed 4 whole games. Do you think, or do you believe Jamar Chase would have been the league's top receiver statistically if he did not miss 4 games? Do you think he would have just outdone everyone numbers-wise if he didn't miss those games?
No. I mean, he had, 87 catches for 1,046 yards and 87 a game. And I mean, obviously that's really impressive. And
don't forget, the Bengals only played 16 games, and the Bills game before it was canceled didn't count statistically.
Sure, but Justin Jefferson also had 1,800 yards and over 100 yards a game, 128 catches. Justin Jefferson was an animal this year. So like, to put it in perspective, Jamar Chase would have needed. I'm trying to do math off the top of my head, like we just talked
800
about.
more yards divided by 5.
805, whatever that, whatever that is per game. He would have needed to do that. He would have needed 160 per game to try and catch Justin Jefferson. That's not happening. So
let's say he gets out of those 5 games, he has 2 or 3 games over 100. He's not going to catch up to him, but I think that still makes him top 5. I'd have to look again, but that would make him a top 5 receiver.
I would have to look at the stats and kind of see where he ranks. But then, I mean, it's kind of if he played, like T. Higgins played in 16 games technically, so 15 really, but like
right.
And I think it's normal to miss a game or 2 in a season, but if Jamar Chase is healthy for 5 games, does T. Higgins go over 1,000 yards? If Jamar Chase is playing 16, 17 games, Tyler Boyd finished with 750. Where is Tyler Boyd? Like who like there's only one ball, and I know that's cliche, and I know that's kind of what everybody kind of jokes about, but at some point, like somebody's getting the ball and somebody's not.
So you actually brought up a good question. Like, does T. Higgins get those yards? Like, does he? Does T. Higgins get over 1,000 yards if he doesn't miss those games? I mean, what do you think? If you had to guess.
I don't know. You kind of look at the game logs. Your hunch is no, because against Cleveland, he had that catch late for the touchdown. But then he had 60 yards against Carolina, and they blew Carolina out. Then he had 148 against Pittsburgh. I'm not sure he's doing that with Jamar in the lineup. Not saying he can. I don't think he's doing that. He has 114 the next week. Not sure he's doing that with Jamar. And then Jamar comes back and he posts 35 yards against the Chiefs. So,
well, I was going to say, too, if you actually look at the top 5, so I have it pulled up. So Justin Jefferson was a freak animal. That's why he had the AP Offensive Player of the Year award. Tyreek Hill right behind him. Devontae Adams right behind him. A.J. Brown, who just played in the Super Bowl. Stephon Diggs. I actually think if Jamar does not miss those 4 games that I mentioned, and if, the Bills Bengals game didn't go the way that it did, and he plays 17 games in a whole year, I easily think he's at least going to beat out Stephon Diggs. A.J. Brown, I don't know. I mean, this is from a receiving yard standpoint and receptions point of view, but I think he easily beats out Stephon Diggs as just the 5th leading receiver from a yard standpoint. Reception-wise, when you rearrange the top 5, actually Austin Eckler, believe it or not, as a running back, had 107 catches, which is crazy to me. He was the 5th best receiver in terms of receptions. I still think he beats out Eckler, Diggs. Point I'm trying to make. I don't know if he catches up to like Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson.
So he averaged 87.2 per game this year, and if you times that by 17, assuming he's healthy for all 17, assuming that he plays in all 17, that would put him 4th in
there you go.
5th. He would be ahead of Stephon Diggs, but he'd be behind A.J. Brown, Devontae Adams, right, Tyreek Hill, and Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, I mean, that all makes sense to me. I think, like, mathematically it adds up. Personally, I just think from a qualitative standpoint, like, it doesn't shock me or surprise me. I mean, A.J. Brown, I think, and I will say this, not that I didn't know much about him before this year, but my God, the Eagles just hit I'm trying to find the right word. I mean, jackpot's so cliche. They hit a gold mine with that dude. I guess Green Rush.
I mean, everybody knew he was really, really good when he was coming out.
I never really paid much attention to him, and I didn't pay as much attention to him as I should have. Forgive me, A.J. Brown, if you're listening to this. Until, I saw how good the Eagles were this year. I mean, he was Ryan Tannehill's best target, and I still don't understand why the Titans did what they did. Shame on John Robinson and the Titans front office for that, but man, Jalen Hurts, if he's in Philly long-term, which, by the way, he is eligible for a contract extension too. I just realized that because he was drafted the same year as Joe Burrow. Him and A.J. Brown.
And he doesn't have the 5th year because he was a 2nd-round pick. So this is the last year of his deal.
Exactly.
Whereas
so, I mean,
if you give Burrow the 5th-year extension, he's got 2.
Yeah. So he's going to have to, I think, get extended, which he will. I mean, the Eagles are going to invest in him regardless. But, man, Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, that's going to be a duo to watch. But one last thing I wanted to ask on that note before we go into break. So I just talked about Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, and you could talk about so many other, top duos we've seen in the league. But, from a quarterback wide receiving duo, whether it's Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, or the one that I just mentioned, A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts. I mean, can you make an argument that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase will be the best specific, just between those two, the best duo in all of football next year? Or is it too narrow to not include T. Higgins in that conversation?
That's a hard question to answer. I wonder. Yeah, that's a hard question to answer because do you include?
That's why we asked him.
Do you add Travis Kelce into that conversation too?
That is a good one, actually.
Is it Mahomes and Burrow, or excuse me, Mahomes and Kelce, or Burrow and Chase?
Right.
Because Burrow, I don't think anybody's going to disagree that he's the best quarterback in the league. Mahomes is. So
exactly.
I don't know. That's a hard thing to say. I mean, we've mentioned it on this podcast a lot. I think when you talk about top 2, top 3, the Bengals have the best receiving core in the league. I think that's kind of where you are right now with the Bengals. But I don't know. That's something I'm going to have to think about. That's an interesting way to look at it.
I mean, if you're bringing up Travis Kelce, I don't know. And I say this respectfully because personally, from like a personality point of view, he's in some ways my spirit animal. You can laugh at me all you want for saying that. But, I mean, he's 33. He's going to be 34 this year. Like, he's good. I mean, he was a top 5 receiver this year at tight end, by the way. He has the best player in the game, if not the best quarterback. But tight ends, I don't know what their window was. I mean, what was Tony Gonzalez? Like, I don't think he was.
Tony Gonzalez played until he was old.
36? I think he was 36 when he retired. He was up there, 36, 37.
Tony Gonzalez retired when he was 37.
37. So I don't know.
He played his 37-year-old season.
Travis Kelce has a couple more years, or maybe he's going to challenge that and say, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to play till I'm 40. Maybe he'll be like the Tom Brady of tight ends. I don't know. I'd have to see, like, if anyone ever played longer than Tony
Antonio Gates
Gonzalez.
played until he was 38. So like there have been guys that have played that long, but
oh man, that's right. Yeah, he was. Oh man, he retired not that long ago. You're right. Yeah, because that was when Phillip Rivers was kind of at the end of his time, and I want to say Los Angeles, but he was in San Diego most of his time there. That's a good one. I'm just gonna go out on a whim and say I think yes, because Kelsey's not getting much younger. Stephon Diggs, I question what happened to him at the end of the year, especially how he kind of leveled off. Listen, Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown are phenomenal. They played in the Super Bowl this year, but still have Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. A.J. Brown, you could say is just as good as Jamar Chase, but then you look at Joe Burrow versus Jalen. Jalen's more of the dual threat, but again, you got to look at what Joe Burrow did going into the NFL, coming into the NFL, being in the NFL. I think they kind of win that one by a whim because I think Jalen Hurts is that good, and his development was the best I've ever seen in that span in 2-3 years. But when we come back, we're going to talk more about one receiver I haven't mentioned a lot. We're going to talk about his future in Cincinnati, where he fits in the grand scheme of things. Plus, we're going to get into a little trash talk, and I'll tell you exactly what that looks like right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast. Hey there, it's Muhammad Ahmad from the Strictly Stripes podcast. You might be wondering, what exactly is Cincinnati Football Insider? Well, it's a community of fans who want the inside scoop on the Bengals and a direct connection to the Strictly Stripes podcast and the reporters who cover the team, and that would be me, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Neislick. It works like this. Andrew, Mike, and I will text your phone a few times a day with breaking news, analysis, and our insights on the Bengals. It's the inside scoop on what we're hearing, and we'll give you the inside word before it even hits social media. Being an insider is the best way to participate with the podcast and get in on special events and Zoom calls with me, Mike, and Andrew. And the best part is you can text us directly. It's a great way to cut through the clutter of Facebook, Twitter, other social media, and avoid the trolls for just $4.99 a month. Still not sure? Well, just try it for 2 weeks, and if you don't like it, you can text the word STOP at any time, but you won't want to cancel once you join the community of hardcore Bengals fans. Here's the best way to get on board. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals, click on the blue banner at the top of the page, or if it's easier, text 513-940-4193. It's a great time to try the 2 weeks free, as we'll be reporting live from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. Plus, we'll be covering free agency on the way to the NFL Draft in April. Give us a try for 2 weeks and see what you think. Just text this number again. It's 513-940-4193 and become an insider today. And thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So we talked all about Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, how they fared amongst other top 5 receivers, how they fared in general, just with their skills, their numbers, and where Joe Burrow helped elevate them and where they elevated themselves. And I have not mentioned one name, at least not since the beginning of the show, and that was Tyler Boyd. Now, I've thought long and hard about this, and I've really kind of calculated this, and I think this might kind of shock or interest some people, but here's the thing with Tyler Boyd. First of all, before we get into what he did this year, and we'll talk about what he did this year based on what I'm about to pose, but I was looking at the Bengals cap space. Tyler Boyd, his cap hit for next season would be $10.2 million. That's the 7th highest on the team. It's not quite as high as Joe Mixon's, and we talked about the pros and cons of keeping or cutting him. That's a lot of money, over $10 million, 7th most cap space on the team. He's entering the last year of his deal. He'll be a free agent in 2024. He's on the older side of the age of 30, and granted, for someone his age, he's playing very youthfully, but he is almost 30. He's just about 29 years old. And so we kind of weighed the pros and cons of, do you release Joe Mixon? Do you keep him? And I want to ask you, Andrew, we've talked about making room for Joe Burrow, making room for T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Are there going to be some tough decisions made? Do you let Tyler Boyd go and save the $10 million and spread that out to everyone else? Or do you restructure his deal, or do you just let him ride out that last year and then maybe let him walk in 2024? What do you do if you're the Bengals in this case?
Yeah, if you're the Bengals, I think it depends on kind of what your long-term plan is for T. Higgins. We looked at the receiver contracts a few weeks ago, but just kind of looking at it again, you got Tyreek Hill making $30 million. He set the market. But then you got Devontae Adams, 28, DeAndre Hopkins, just over 27, Cooper Kupp, almost 27, A.J. Brown, 25. Like, Jamar Chase is going to make upwards of $30 million a year, like against the cap. Like Jamar Chase is going to make some serious coin. So are you willing to pay Jamar Chase, I don't know, $29 million a year and then turn around and pay T. Higgins the Terry McLaurin contract or the DJ Moore contract where he's making $21.5, $22 million a year? Like, are you willing to commit all of that money to two receivers, especially when you have a quarterback who is going to make $45 million a year, $50 million a year?
I think, yeah, at least 40, no less than 40.
Because at that point, like if you're like, let's say that's correct. If you're going to commit let's say 29 to Jamar, and then let's just make it easy and say 21 to T. Higgins. Like if that's going to be and I know the cap hits are going to fluctuate and things like that, but you're going to commit $50 million to two receivers. And I know this was a Tyler Boyd conversation, but you're going to commit $50 million to two receivers, and then you're going to commit another $45 to $50 million to a quarterback. Like you're going to have three players that are on your salary cap for almost $100 million.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to do that. So I think it depends on what you want to do with T. Higgins, because if T. Higgins is going to be here long term, like if they're going to make that decision, whether somebody takes less, somebody plays on a tag for it, whatever, whatever kind of math you can do to make it work to keep T around here for at least a few more seasons. If you're going to do that, then I think Tyler Boyd, you almost have to say bye. If you're gonna let T go or move him or do whatever, pull the AJ Brown where you trade him away and you take a pick and things like that, that's fine. But then I think you keep Tyler Boyd because you're not trying to get rid of your number 2 and your number 3 receiver. Because Tyler Boyd's
pretty risky.
So Tyler Boyd's pretty serviceable number 2 receiver. So at that point, you're adding guys in the draft. Maybe you're adding a free agent or two. You would absolutely, kind of fill that out if you don't have T. Higgins. But if you don't have T. Higgins, you have Tyler Boyd. And if you don't have Tyler Boyd, I don't know if you have T. Higgins, but it makes it more likely.
I like the way you framed it. It's not about, Tyler Boyd's not good or Tyler Boyd's not serviceable. He is serviceable. Like, I don't want to make it sound like he's not. Very much so he is, even with the age and him being on his last year. I mean, he had 1,000-yard season, I want to say 2019 when they were 2-14. Like, he played with A.J. Green, before A.J. Green went to Arizona, during the Andy Dalton era. And keep in mind, like, Tyler Boyd's been through it all. Like, he's been with the Bengals since the Marvin Lewis era. Like, he's a leader in that locker room emotionally, just physically on the field. He's definitely brought value to where he's a team captain for a reason. I mean, he was someone who had no drops in 2021 until that one drop he had in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl. Like, he was one of football's best receivers in terms of holding on to the ball and not losing it and catching it. So he is very much serviceable. And so really it comes down to, what do you want? Duke Tobin, what do you want, Bengals? Do you want to focus on T long term? Do you want to focus on, locking him in with Jamar Chase? Do you want to focus on just Jamar and Joe, to where Joe gets like that 45 a year, maybe 50 a year, close to like what Deshaun Watson is making or Patrick Mahomes? Like, do you want to put him in that upper echelon with those dudes who are like MVP caliber? At least Mahomes is, because he just won it, or do you maybe does he want to settle for less and be closer to like, someone like a Josh Allen, who's still making a lot, but is on the kind of the bottom tier of that top 5? It comes down to that. It comes down to what you want with T, what T wants. Because like, if you look at what Spot Track estimates, I mean, if you give an extension to Chase, that'd be about just over 25 mil. Higgins would be about 20, 21. And then I don't think Boyd would get it, because again, that's going to be impossible. But if you extended him, that'd be 15 mil. I mean, the Bengals are going to have to work out deals, I think, with the 3 receivers to keep their cap hit really about less than 20% of that overall cap, annually speaking. If you do the math, I think that number is about 45 mil for next year to make it work. But again, that's if you can make it work. Like, I'm just purely speculating here. I mean, you look at the Chargers, like, they had the largest cap hit at receiver. Mike Nizick wrote about this. I mean, when you had Keenan Allen and Mike Williams making over 33 combined, that's going to make their cap exceed over 40 million in 2023. I mean, so Yeah, I mean, like wide receivers are going to get paid more. I mean, a lot of it's because of guys like Tyreek Hill resetting the market. So, I mean, they're not going to make more than quarterbacks, but like they're going to be the highest paid position group outside of, quarterbacks. So that's what makes for an interesting situation. I think especially when the Bengals have such good talented players. But, for me, I think if you're the Bengals, I don't know. I mean, this is tough because like you just cannot keep everyone, and I'd have to obviously kind of go through, free agency and look at who they keep in free agency, who they don't. I think it comes down to that. Who doesn't get paid in free agency and walks, who does and for how much. It all factors into that vacuum. But me, you, and Mike have talked about of how much do you give the trio, the big three, like we talked about. And then you have to look and see, how much is left for Tyler, how much is left, or I guess how much is left from within Tyler and within Joe Mixon. Like, I think you have to think about maybe here's a better question. Like, do you keep him over Joe Mixon? Like, do you keep Joe Mixon over Boyd? Like, that's another thing to look at is like, we talked about Mixon being a cap hit. Lyle Collins is up there. Like, he's going to be a pretty big cap hit. He's in the top 7. And you got to think about the fact that he's almost 30. He just tore his ACL. He may not be ready for the beginning of the year. Like, that's another name that I think we'll talk more about later when we, grade the offensive line this week. But like, I think it's not about, just get rid of Tyler Boyd. It's about, do you get rid of Tyler Boyd because you're already paying T so much and you're paying, Joe Burrow, and you're going to, think about the long term with Jamar when he gets extended. And then, they have depth at that position. You have Trenton Irwin, who I don't think would be the one to take over at that 3 spot for Tyler Boyd. Or if, like, say, Higgins moves on and Tyler Boyd moves to number 2, I just still don't think he takes over the number 3. I mean, he has a place. And by the way, I don't want to talk about wide receivers without mentioning him because there's a reason why when they cut Mike Thomas, they elevated him from the practice squad. He was one of Joe Burrow's most trusted targets when Jamar was hurt. We talked so much about T. I mean, he threw a lot to Trenton Irwin. And even after Jamar came back, like Trenton Irwin was still making catches, regular season and playoffs. He had that nice touchdown over Devin McCourty, who is one of the longest tenured players in NFL history at his position. So, you have depth there. He has a role, even if it's not a starting role. But at that point, you just have to kind of look at, who's in the draft, who's available. We got the combine coming up. We'll talk more about that. And so, if the Bengals ultimately decide to move on from one of those guys, especially Tyler Boyd, then you just got to, go to the draft and trust that, you can pluck another elite receiver like you did with, Jamar and T in the last 3 years. So, again, it's not about, Tyler Boyd wasn't good. It's more about, is he good enough to fit in with what you're already paying those guys? So we talked so much about math on this podcast. Golly, Andrew, I thought I was avoiding math going into journalism, but I guess you still have to deal with it somehow. And I mean, numbers are there for a reason. I want to wrap up with some fun here. We've talked about some tense, hard pressing decisions. I want to have some fun here. So first of all, I'm going to preface this for those who don't already know. I live on Twitter. I live on Twitter more than any social media app. I have Instagram. I have Facebook. I don't have TikTok, and I'll tell you more about why I don't have TikTok. But I have Twitter, and I live on there, partially because of my job, partially because I just love all the takes. Maybe that makes me crazy. Maybe it just makes me the average layman. I don't know. But I've been seeing so much trash talk between players this season, and I have seen what I think was the best trash talk on Twitter the other day. And I know, Andrew, you saw this, and many of you listening probably saw this, but if you didn't, Juju Smith-Schuster, in the spirit of Valentine's Day, tweeted a picture of James Bradbury, who was, the subject of that controversial hold call at the end of the Super Bowl, and he said, "You can hold me all you want. Happy Valentine's Day," with a picture of him glued onto a heart background. And that stirred up a lot of resentment. I don't want to say resentment, but it stirred up a lot of responses, like A.J. Brown, who said, on the one hand, congratulations, and on the other hand, you're a TikTok boy, which that was great because obviously Juju lives on TikTok the way I live on Twitter. I mean, dude, was that the best, especially with it being the end of the year, was that the best trash talk you've seen between anyone this year in the NFL? I think that's up there. And maybe I'm just saying that because we're off the Super Bowl and all that, but that was good. That was good.
Yeah, I mean, this year I would have to kind of think about it. I remember when I think it was one of the Packers defensive backs called Michael Thomas a slant boy. I thought that was really funny. That was a good one. That was my first thing when I saw that. I remember that. But yeah, I mean, I hate when people get upset by it. Trash talk's fun. I want more of
I
it.
love it. Wait, I think it was it Carlton Davis? I think it was him.
No,
He
you know what
played
it
for a
was,
couple
Carlton
years.
Davis. You know what? You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
It was Carlton Davis who plays for the
Thanks
Tampa
for
Bay
looking that up.
Buccaneers.
Yeah, I thought it was the Packers. I'm glad you did a live fact check on me there, because I genuinely thought it was the Packers.
Yeah,
But it was
I actually,
it was the
yeah.
it was the but yeah.
Man, I think that's some of the best. Yeah, the Juju AJ Brown clapback was a good one. The slant boy from Carlton Davis was a good one. I think one of the worst takes that ended up like backfiring was Justin Reed confusing Hayden Hurst to T Higgins, which, you know, connecting it to the Bengals here. I mean, he couldn't even get the numbers right for one. So like you already kind of screwed up there, buddy. And he even confused him with Tyler Higbee, who plays for the Los Angeles Rams, so not even a Bengals player. And then he pretty much gets torched in that game with the signature stiff arm from Samaje Perine, who played in that game. And then you have Jamar Chase calling him tuna in a can after the game. Or no, someone asked him about it, and he said, tuna in a can, bro. Next question. And, you know, you also had him flashing the dollar signs in his face, like imaginary dollar signs in his face during the game after T. Higgins scored, you know, during that Week 13 matchup. So that was pretty bad. I think that was some of the most backfiring trash talk. But, man, TikTok boy, that's a good one. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, I mean, gotta talk about the Burrowhead stuff, man. I mean, the Chiefs took that to heart. Like Chris Jones, Travis Kelce, they took it to heart. Like Chris Jones ended his like Friday press conference before the AFC title game with, "I'll see y'all at Burrowhead." And then you got Travis Kelce, you know, hogging the mic when Patrick Mahomes is being interviewed after that game, saying, "Burrowhead, my ah." I'm not gonna say the word because my mom taught me better, but you know, Burrowhead, my you know what. And so I was like,
He
okay,
said
they took
ass.
My mother raised me with manners, Andrew. Shame on you.
I don't want to leave our listeners waiting. Listeners
they can look it
wondering
up. It's
what
on
he said.
YouTube.
I'm thinking about the listeners.
Well, I'm thinking about the higher road, but I also think about the listeners too. I want you all to know that I care about you. It's why we do this podcast. But yeah, that was good. I'm trying to think. Because yeah, Mike Hilton was the one who started the Burrowhead talk. And then you had like Willie Gay saying, "Oh, this was good. This was good." I don't know if you saw this. So remember when Willie Gay said nothing impressed him about the Bengals offense?
Oh, right, yeah.
Well, he said that, and then like NFL Films does like those kind of in-game type story recaps, and they showed him in the middle of the AFC title game saying to Jamar Chase, "Can I get your jersey?" And I don't think he was being sarcastic. Like I think he wanted his jersey after the game, and Jamar was like, "Hell no, hell no." And, well, you know, Willie got the last laugh because, you know, the Chiefs went to the Super Bowl and won it. But, I mean, Jamar kind of humbled him there of like, "Oh, I thought nothing impressed you, Willie." And plus, don't forget, they actually went against each other in college because Jamar went to LSU and then he went to Mississippi State. So he actually, I think, maybe has history with him. I don't know. Or the opposite. Maybe they like each other and Jamar got pissed. I'd have to dig into that, but makes the sport great. I saw that and I was like, we have to talk about this because – man, I think Juju's the one that got clapped back. I think A.J. Brown won that fight. Even though, you know, I say Juju won the battle because he got the Super Bowl win. I think A.J. won the war with that clapback. So props to you, A.J. Brown. Props to you for taking the higher road. So we'll stay with us because we're going to continue our positional reviews and roundups when Mike joins me later this week. Plus, we'll all get together and put a bow on the offensive reviews overall, and we'll get into the defense next week. So make sure you stay tuned in for that. But once again, for myself and Andrew Gillis, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you Thursday.